Directed with precision, the protests of rural America today are guided by master organizers.
Really the success or the failure of the farm movement as a whole in Iowa as well as in other states depends upon the degree of success that groups such as Prairie Fire and the Farm Unity Coalition have on cultivating and maintaining that kind of grassroots base.
The Grassroots and more coming up next.
This episode of Market to Market was recorded June 14, 1985. The program was in its 10th season. Ronald Reagan was president. John Block was the Secretary of Agriculture, and it was the height of the 1980s farm crisis. The market analyst on this program was Doug Hjort. Now sit back and enjoy this episode of Market to Market.
This is the June 14 edition of Market to Market. This week, the stalemate of the federal budget battle, America's future in the global grain game, and the politics of rural protest.
Hello, I'm Chet Randolph. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago reported this week that agricultural indebtedness fell 1.5% last year. The drop is the second decline in 2 years, making it the first time since World War II that farm debt has fallen in consecutive years. A drop in indebtedness, however, hardly means a return to prosperity. Indeed, there are indications the farm economy will get worse before it gets better. This week, a farm credit system study showed that production credit associations affiliated with the Omaha district will require an injection of $640 million to break even through the next 4 years. Meanwhile, the chief economist of the Kansas City Federal Reserve said that net farm income will fall below the USDA estimate this fall, and farmland values will continue to fall for the next 2 to 4 years. All that will put considerable pressure on lawmakers who are attempting to negotiate a budget compromise that will slice the deficit. With farm programs already slated for cuts, there will probably be resistance to using more federal funds to bail out agriculture. Indeed, the conference committee is having difficulty agreeing on items of broader interest in the budget, much less special concerns like agriculture. Both the House and the Senate have passed budget resolutions, but at week's end, negotiators on the joint House-Senate Conference Committee appeared to be far apart on such issues as defense spending, next year's Social Security increase, and the termination of a dozen government programs.
In the field, poverty as a way of life. A new study by the National Center for Food and Agricultural Policy indicates poverty is a way of life in rural America. The study shows that more than 1/3 of the nation's poor live in rural areas. Hired farm hands are said to be among the most impoverished, with 25% of white and 50% of black farm workers unable to earn a living above the poverty level. Contrary to popular opinion, most of the working poor in farming are local residents rather than migrants.
To be sure, most of the rural poor are not farmers, yet there is growing concern over the fact that America's farmers are becoming poorer and their prospects for the future poorer still. Farm prices continue to decline for the third straight month, 11% below levels of a year ago, the lowest level in more than 2 years. Given the times, it's little wonder that farm protests have become an integral part of the rural landscape. But behind the protests, as Jim Kay reports, is an ambitious effort to harness the politics of rural protest.
And we wanted to tell people,
What you're about to see is a 1-minute version of life on the farm protest front.
we want to tell people that they need to make phone calls. How many can we expect? Are you going to come? Can you bring a carload? That kind of thing.
And it goes on and on.
We did the mailing, which involved 500 people or so, but the mailing in and of itself is not going to cut it. So we really need to gear up the phone bank.
If you would be able to come and if you would be able to contact some more people.
We know it's an awfully busy time, but it's important that we get a crowd and turn people out and encourage the neighbors to come.
Yes.
I thank everyone who is here today.
We are asking people individually to bring white crosses made of lath to plant there in the city park.
Let us resist.
And so Dave thought it would be a good idea if we had people in Omaha already that have been hammering away on them for a while.
Stop the sale. Family farm. Stop the sale.
There are few in the business better organized or more vocal about the plight of farmers than Dave Ostendorf and Dan Levitas, who together form the heart and soul of Prairie Fire. Prairie Fire is an independent, nonprofit organization that last winter grew out of the Midwest operation of rural America. They spend endless hours on the telephone and on the road, organizing and pontificating on behalf of America's farmers, as in this recent rally, protesting the practices of the farm credit system.
And we're here to say to that system that we're not going to stand back and take it quietly anymore, the kinds of actions that you're taking on our people, and we're going to fight back.
How Ostendorf and Levitas came to wage the farmers' battles is in itself a story. They are viewed by some as anachronisms, throwbacks to a generation that understood peaceful protest to be a way of life. Dave Ostendorf.
Personally, I do this because I have a fundamental commitment to issues of social justice, and that comes out of my own understanding of what my faith is. I'm a minister in the United Church of Christ. My ministry is much broader than a single church. It goes to the entire state of Iowa, if you will, well beyond the entire state of Iowa, working with people who are facing economic and social problems as a result of institutions and policies that are basically unjust.
Ostendorf's roots in rural protest are deep. After finishing his education, he returned to his home in southern Illinois to organize farmers who are at odds with the coal industry over its strip mining practices. After a brief stay in Washington, he came to Iowa to run the Midwest branch of Rural America. Ostendorf denies he is a self-appointed leader of the farm protest movement and insists instead that he stepped into a role that needed filling when the farm economy began to crumble.
We did really almost by accident get into this whole situation in early 1982 when the U.S. Farmers Association organized this meeting of the Iowa Farm Unity Coalition, and because we had that staff capacity to work with the coalition, we just kept doing more and really just got into the thick of it very fast, and now seem to be in the thick of it not only here in Iowa but nationally as well. And
Ostendorf's rapid rise to the forefront of the movement carried people like Levitas in his wake. A native of New York City, Levitas came to Iowa from the University of Michigan to complete an internship under Ostendorf's tutelage at Rural America. But once in farm country, he discovered something more than a vocation.
Years, but my commitment is to the issue and, more importantly, the people who are affected by it. And this is not a temporary lark for me. It's not just a self-indulgent exercise in a bit of troublemaking to satisfy my desires. It springs forth from a real interest and concern about how these issues affect me and will affect my children in the future, and will affect future generations to come.
That effect already is being felt through strong grassroots efforts in the country and in Washington, which recently saw the introduction into Congress of the Farm Policy Reform Act, legislation which calls for a national referendum on mandatory acreage controls and increasing price support levels based on parity.
That farm bill was not written by Senator Harkin. It was not written by Senator Zirinsky. It wasn't written by anyone in Washington. It was really written by this core group of farmer leadership that has been active in the movement for so long, and I think that's the proper role. I don't really think it's...
Like Levitas, Ostendorf rejects political labels, but admits most of their critics view the movement as left of center. That's something he says he can live with. What he and Levitas cannot tolerate is what they perceive to be the inactivity of the people making the decisions regarding agriculture's future.
But then again, the kind of leadership for social movement never comes from circles within the establishment. It always comes from circles of dissent. And I think that's what Dave and I and this organization represents, and what the Farm Unity Coalition represents.
That sense of strength should stand them in good stead, because both men agree there will be a continuing need for organized protest in rural America, and that groups such as Prairie Fire will play a role. And even though Ostendorf says he feels like he's swimming upstream 80% of the time, the objectives remain clearly in sight.
Our fundamental goal is to work ourselves out of a job with respect to this farm crisis. I mean, I'd like to see nothing better than that. If we could move on to some other issues and concerns within the next year or sooner. I mean, that's what we're about here. And if we can pass this kind of work on to people and hopefully resolve the problems, then the sooner the better.
To your health. The artificial sweetener cyclamate, ordered off American store shelves 15 years ago, does not appear, according to a National Academy of Sciences study, to cause cancer. The findings, however, do not automatically clear the way for a return of the sweetener to consuming Americans. A National Academy of Sciences committee says more tests are necessary to determine if cyclamate enhances the effects of other chemicals that are known to cause cancer.
Argentina this week devalued its peso by 18%, the most dramatic economic measure thus far by the nation's civilian government. It's expected the move will be unpopular with Argentine citizens, as it will raise the cost of imports and increase inflationary pressures. But bankers and economists say the devaluation is necessary to keep Argentina's cash-producing exports competitive. The fact that Argentina, for the most part, exports grain, coupled with the fact that the nation to the south is already competitive in world grain markets, means quite simply, as Sarah Frasher explains in this fourth of a four-part series, that the global grain game is getting tougher.
On June 5th, 1973, the July futures contract on soybeans hit an all-time high of $12.90. On February 26, 1974, the May contract on wheat peaked at $6.36. And on October 4th, 1974, the May contract on corn hit $4.13. That was the beginning of what many thought would be permanent prosperity for American farmers. Prosperity based on a rising tide of exports in the 1970s. The tide was ushered in and sustained by a variety of factors, a short list of which would include, not necessarily in order of importance, crop shortfalls around the world in the early 70s, a ban on the Peruvian anchovy harvest in '72, the emergence of the Soviet Union and China as major buyers, changes in U.S. export policy, plenty of credit to developing nations and Eastern Europe, a low-valued American dollar, and lots of OPEC dollars. Today, that's all changed. Today, American farmers aren't selling as much as they used to.
And now we're saying, where do we go from here? Most people feel that this may be the norm, and that blip during the 70s could be the abnormal high due to all the adjustments. We begin to think that's probably true, that we're now on a long-term trend which is much lower than what we had in the 70s.
Slower growth demands different strategies than what worked in the 1970s, when trade mushroomed, and so did America's share of it. But even if American farm programs become more market-oriented, even if the dollar declines some, as it has, even if American farmers become more efficient, and even if export subsidy programs of various sorts are expanded, many observers say the growth of the 1970s isn't likely to be repeated. Put simply, during the last decade, the global game of world trade became much more competitive.
First of all, after the price rise in 1973, many countries around the world, developed and undeveloped, both said, we've got to do something about our agricultural productivity, and they started putting money into it. Some countries a lot, some countries not so much. Research and development programs have a 10 to 20-year lag period in terms of when the money goes in terms of when the results start to come out. You know, we're getting into that phase where if these programs are going to have some success, they're going to start revealing themselves. That's the first.
That's not all. Political decisions were made in some countries, like Argentina, to either encourage or at least stop discouraging grain production because they recognized the earnings potential of farm exports. In addition, some of the factors that helped exports boom in the 1970s were one-time events that could not be expected to be repeated or sustain themselves. Events like the big Soviet purchases, the impact of which is now anticipated by the markets.
These are one-time only effects. They tend to have a big price impact immediately, but as the economic system gets used to them, their price impact tends to go down. So I would say for those three reasons, just to recap, the one-time shifts in demand, the policy changes around the world, the shifts in R&D throughout the world to agricultural orientation, say that we are going to face a much more competitive world market in the 1980s and 90s.
The economics of food production isn't all that could affect America's competitive position. There is also the politics of food trade, politics that tends to protectionism on the part of customers and competitors alike. Example, the agricultural policies of the European Community. Policies that result in abundant production that is then sold overseas with subsidies, pushing American farmers out of markets.
And as we saw, the leader of France refused even to discuss with the United States the possibility of taking down their protection for their agriculture, even to talk about it in '86. So we've developed a very strong worldwide protectionist policy. We've developed a very strong anti-feeling toward the United States by communist countries, where we, for example, in Russia, our market share was 70% prior to '79, and it's 30 to 40. I don't think, unless there's a severe shortage and they can't get it anywhere else, I don't think we'll ever regain 70% again. So we've lost that market share. Eastern Europe, we've embargoed Poland. They're not going to give us the market share. They're going to look for other alternatives before they come to the United States. So so what's going to happen to us is that even if we lowered the price, the competitor will make it. Even if the dollar were to come off, we still have these other problems that I think will prevent us from getting back to the levels that we experienced in the 70s.
This could also make a difference. For decades, American farmers' edge has come in part from technology born of years of research, technology that allowed farmers to produce more efficiently, technology developed here in the United States. Today, with information flowing across borders, with big ag-related firms selling know-how overseas, some are concerned that the technology gap is narrowing.
We have witnessed an integration of the world in the last 30 years that is something that's mind-boggling when you look at it in historical context. Our technology can now more readily be and more quickly be adapted to the rest of the world because of the establishment of research centers around the world, the flow of information in scientific councils, etc. What that translates into is that a yield advantage which might have lasted due to a technological breakthrough, which might have lasted, let's say, 10 years in the 1950s, may only last 5 years in the 1980s.
Now, technology transfer is a complex process. What we're seeing going on in the world today is price incentives that are encouraging more application of fertilizers, use of higher yielding variety seeds, and cultivating practices that maximize the potential that mixture has. That's not necessarily new technology. Much of that technology has been around and been practiced fairly broadly in the United States. I think what you need to focus on in terms of technology in agriculture is not only moving out that frontier of knowledge, but how quickly those new discoveries become commonplace practices across the agricultural system. And on America's research and extension services and the high educational levels on average of its farmers still give it an advantage over its competitors in that area.
Rob Johnson also thinks the United States holds other advantages, advantages that will enable it to hold its own in the future. Key among those is the variety and volume of commodities American agriculture can produce and move, assets that no one else can match.
That is that we have the capacity to expand our exports, to double our exports, without adding any additional facilities. No new capital investments necessary. So the incremental cost of expanding exports for the United States is very low. We also have the advantage of the Mississippi River system cheap transportation flowing through the grain belt that gives us ready, inexpensive access to major export outlets. One other advantage that the United States offers against those other competitors: no other competitor has the same full range of agricultural commodities and the same capacity to ship in whatever size vessel the buyer wants on whatever shipping schedule the buyer wants. We can offer him the full supermarket of commodities at the time and the place that he wants it. And that is an enormous advantage if we can stimulate the demand base that makes it work.
The operative phrase there is stimulating the demand base that makes it all work. How to do that, how to stimulate demand by changing U.S. farm programs, monetary and fiscal policies, and the rules of international trade, have been the subject of countless conferences and hearings, scores of speeches, and stacks of studies and reports.
Regardless of the river of words, though, the bottom line seems to be that however the United States positions itself to become more competitive, the competition is positioning itself too. But there is one footnote to this series on the global grain game, a disclaimer, if you will. In agriculture, predictions are a dangerous business. Just ask the people who banked on the promises of the 1970s export boom. So, anything is possible, even another export boom. But it probably wouldn't be wise to bank on that either. I'm Sarah Frasher.
Coming up next, the Market to Market Report, insight on the outlook.
The week's market news has provoked more thought than action. Weather, slack world demand, and aggressive marketing by Southern Hemisphere countries continue to be the factors that dominate the grain markets. The likely re-entry of Canadian pork into some Midwestern states and the prospect of a reduction in cattle numbers were the stuff of conjecture in the livestock markets. Joining us now to give us his promise of what's ahead with a little insight is one of our regular market analysts, Doug Hjort. Welcome, Doug.
Hello, Chet.
What about this devaluation of the peso? How is this going to affect wheat prices in your view?
Well, I imagine it's going to make the Argentinians more competitive yet. The bottom line for them is that they have to get their economic house in order somehow or other. And with the help they're getting, or the commitment they're getting from other countries now to get the loan and tide them over, they have to make more money, so to speak.
Well, they have interest rates, inflation running at 1,000%. And we heard earlier that we could actually bring wheat out of Argentina into the U.S. cheaper than we can get it out of our own bins. That's even going to be more and more true than I gather.
Well, that's very true. That is going to be the case. As they work to be more competitive yet in the world market and increasing their production in years to come to generate more gross dollars for their country.
What are the chances that Argentina or Brazil may actually import or ship beans into the U.S.?
Oh, I suppose it's relatively minimal. There have been reports here in the last 10 days that there was actually some product coming in from Brazil, and I expect that will happen. But you know, Chet, that's an interesting thing. We talk about free market agriculture here. We are in a world agricultural situation. We're not just in the United States. We're seeing it crop up all over. And I think if we truly want to be in a world market agriculture, we've got to put up with the inconvenience of being too high on our prices sometimes.
And when you say inconvenience, that means quite a difference in our price. Well, okay, let's take another move over into the hogs then, where we've got hogs coming in from Canada. Now, what's that situation?
Well, same thing there. We placed restrictions on bringing those hogs in here. You can say it was over health issues or whatever, but it was an economic issue primarily. And now the Canadians are probably going to, or at least it looks like they're going to ban this drug, chloramphenicol, at least on a trial basis. They're trying to get away from it. Eventually, I imagine those hogs will start to move back to the United States. First of all, they are, as I understand it, reducing their breeding herd. That means there's more pork coming on the Canadian market, more pork perhaps coming into the United States. We don't know that for sure.
Now, at least hog futures did rally a bit on Friday. Do you see that the worst is over on the hog side? What do you see?
Well, I think so. I think the seasonal rallies from here will be to the upside, but we've got a tremendous problem in trying to get livestock prices higher, and that is that we are still consuming record or near record total pounds of meat. Poultry, of course, being up, it's been well documented. The bottom line of this is that I think we're going to go a very choppy sideways action here on the hogs, but trying to go a little to the upside.
Coming back to the wheat, we have noticed a little rebound in wheat. Why?
Well, several reasons.
That's on the futures. I don't suppose that much on the cash.
Well, the cash came back a little bit too. Basis levels relatively tight. Must remember that where harvest is progressing, and it was interrupted this past week by weather, but where it is progressing, the cash price is well below loan. 70-some% of the crop is eligible for loan, so that's the biggest buyer of the wheat crop now, not being forced onto the cash market. Now, the exports, on the other hand, are tremendously weak at the present time, but I think we are so far behind a year ago that we'll start to pick up on that. I would think wheat prices will bounce up and down a little for the next week or two as well, associated with the harvest progress, but I think we've probably seen the lows in the wheat market.
Now, back on corn and beans, is there weather anywhere in the world that is a problem now that you know of?
Not any significant problems that just jump out and grab us. Even here in the United States, we've had some rain this past week. Weather patterns may be shifting a little too early to tell that. We've still got some dry pockets. Even right now, 35 to 40% of the Corn Belt is still 75% of normal precipitation or less for the spring.
Is there, what might give us a rally of beans over $6 besides dry weather? Anything?
Well, you might get a little bit of a bump now in the demand side, corn and wheat as well. Again, relating back to the BICEP program, the foreign buyers kind of stayed away from our market. They're going to have to play a little catch-up. That has helped our market here as well.
Mm-hmm. And the dollar currency change today, anything significant there?
Well, lots of rumors in the market. We had several major economic reports which said low inflation and not a very strong economic growth.
All right, fine. Thank you very much. That wraps up this edition of Market to Market. We'll be back next week with a report on the efforts to shape the federal budget as lawmakers continue to wrestle with the issue of financing farm programs. Till then, I'm Chet Randolph. Thanks for joining us and have a good week.
Market to Market is a production of Iowa Public Television, which is solely responsible for its content. This program was made possible by grants from the Central Educational Network and this and other public television stations.